Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. My name is Matthew Schnoda. I'm the professor and chair of the Department of Literary Arts here at Brown, and on behalf of our department, it's my great pleasure to welcome Xochitl Gonzalez this afternoon, who will read from her new novel, Anita de Monte Laughs Last, followed by a conversation with President Paxson. To introduce Ms. Gonzalez, I'd like to welcome our president, Dr. Christina Paxson. President Paxson has served as Brown University's 19th president and professor of economics and public policy since 2012. Under her leadership, Brown has elevated teaching and research, developed the physical campus to support a world-class education, strengthened community engagement, and supported the students, faculty, and staff who live and work at Brown. Please join me in welcoming President Paxson.
Thank you, Matthew, and thanks to the Literary Arts Department for hosting this talk. I'm really excited to hear it. I'm thrilled to be here to talk fiction with my friend Xochitl Gonzalez, and she recently published this wonderful book. If you haven't read it, you should. Anita de Monte Laughs Last, and it follows the story of a young woman named Raquel, who's a first-generation Latina student at Brown in the late 1990s, who uncovers the work of a long-forgotten artist. So before I introduce Xochitl, let me just start with some housekeeping. She will conduct a reading and share some thoughts with us, maybe 15 minutes or so. She and I will have a conversation on stage, and then we'll be sure to save time for Q&A from the audience, which will be fun. So about Xochitl. She is a cultural critic, producer, screenwriter, and the New York Times bestselling author of Olga Dies Dreaming. This was named a Best of 2022 by the New York Times, Time, Kirkus, Washington Post, and NPR. Olga Dies Dreaming was the winner of the Brooklyn Public Library Book Prize in Fiction and the New York City Book Awards. A Reese's Book Club pick, her new novel, Anita de Monte Laughs Last, was published only in March of 2024 with Flatiron Books. So a little bit more about Xochitl. She is a 2021 MFA graduate from the Iowa Writers Workshop, and her nonfiction work has been published widely in Elle Decor, Allure, Vogue, Real Simple, and The Cult. She's a staff writer for The Atlantic, where she was recognized as a 2023 finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in Commentary. Prior to writing, Gonzalez was an entrepreneur, fundraiser, all-around hustler for nearly 20 years. She's a board member of the Lower East Side Girls Club and the Brooklyn Public Library, and a trustee of the Corporation of Brown University, where she received her BA in visual art. A native Brooklynite and a proud public school graduate, she lives in her hometown of Brooklyn with her dog. How do I pronounce his name? Hector. Yeah, Hector. So I'm lucky enough to count Xochitl as a corporation colleague, a trusted advisor, and a friend. So Xochitl, I'm happy to turn it over to you for your part of the talk.
To clarify, my dog, I got him when I was in Iowa, and I wanted to make sure everyone was forced to say his name with a Brooklyn accent. And so that's why he's Hector Laveau. Anyway, I'm really happy to be here. I'm going to kind of do a talky read because I sort of like to talk about the genesis of the book, especially being here. So I came to Brown in 1995, and it was sort of like really almost at the beginning. Like, I think my freshman year, a book was published. This probably says everything about setting the table, called Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? That was actually the title of the book, which I sometimes can't even explain, but it was like there was just this like consternation and kind of constant pearl clutching about like why clusters of minority students would hang out together and not want to like socialize with everyone since they were in the school. And I think I had just always felt that I hadn't really seen that experience in a book. And so one day in the pandemic, I was in the midst of trying to make television, which is a strange business, and make Latino television, which is an even stranger, harder business. And my producing partner, after a notes call, was like, art and commerce, what can you do? And I took a long walk and I was like, what can you do? You know, I found myself like thinking about my time in my art history classroom at Brown. I took a lot of art history. I really manipulated that open curriculum to do everything that I liked. And I liked art history, but I never ever studied a single, other than Romare Bearden, a single person of color. I barely studied any women. I think at all. I think birth more so. And that was about it. And I had wonderful professors, but that was it. And it wasn't until my senior year that someone gave me a book on Caribbean art that I even understood that there was a Caribbean art lineage and that I would be curious about it. And somehow that led me to discover the artist Ana Mendieta, who had died in 1985. And really no one talked about. And I just remember kind of going and finding out about the story and realizing that I had taken an entire seminar on her husband, who had theoretically, I think, threw her out the window. And this never came up. And I knew all the, like I was the most fun person to go to a museum with because I would remember all the trivia about everybody's biography. And I was like, he had weird issues with his mother. You know, like I would tell, like, and people were like, that's so fun. And it was like, I can't believe I knew all this stuff about all these people and I never knew that. And somehow in the summer of 2020, this made me really angry in a way that it never made me feel before, because I wondered how I might be different, how culture might be different, how making Latino television might be different if Latino art had been part of the American conversation about art. And so what came was this kind of narrative of these two women's stories, one sort of told from the afterlife and one told from the very much present at Brown University. So I'm going to just start with the epigraph, actually, because it's taken from my freshman year survey class for art history, not Western art history, just art history. Why indeed should one not include artists who embody very different sensibilities from that of the European and the mainstream? There is, in principle, no reason to exclude them whatsoever. However, I have decided to limit this edition to Western art. I have taken a stand about what art I think is most significant that not all readers will agree with, since it favors universality over ethnocentricity. Anthony F. Jansen, and it's from the preface of the 5th edition to History of Art, Volume 2, Harry H. and Abrams, 1994. And I actually hadn't ever read the preface to this book until I hadn't read this preface while I was a student. And it was only now that I was like, oh, I was like, well, therein kind of lies the problem. But I really wanted to, with the character of Raquel, who is our Brown student, sort of embody what that kind of experience means. And how she kind of finds herself in discovering sort of her own place in this lineage that she's really passionate about in this academic study. And so sort of Raquel's journey is kind of marked through a history of office hours visits with her thesis advisor, John Temple. And I'm just going to read a little bit of Raquel's first meeting that we see with John Temple. This is how we meet Raquel. So it's spring of 1998, probably not too far into the semester than we are now. Raquel Toro walked into Professor Temple's light-filled office and, for the first time, did not feel herself shrink. She'd woken up that morning and, admittedly, after a night of 2-for-1 Cosmos with Mavette downtown, looked like shit. But she felt proud, ready to meet the day and John Temple unintimidated, neither by the mountains of books, catalogs, academic texts, tomes of criticism that he not only owned but had, at least in part, authored, nor by the exhibition posters lining the walls featuring shows he had mounted or had a major hand in. Today, Raquel walked in feeling worthy, not just of the company of his brilliance, but of her very place in this school. Before arriving at Brown, Raquel hadn't spent much time pondering what an Ivy League college would be like. She'd been too grateful for the opportunity to have expectations. But during her sophomore year, when John Temple called Raquel to his office hours for the first time, and she saw him behind his vast desk, she knew that this was it. This was what the Ivy League was all about. Wool blazers and expensive but understated watches, salt and pepper beards stroked for effect while holding court for enraptured students. The Ivy League was John Temple, whose name held no meaning to the average or even above average person, but whose work had the power to shape institutions, markets, and culture in the most erudite of forms. He was a man of great importance in the world, and in such proximity to that, despite the brilliantly drawn constellations he commended her on during his seminars, or the incisive yet accessible papers he praised her for, she had always felt deeply insignificant, until today. I got the fellowship, she said, noting the confidence in her own voice. I'm going to be a curatorial fellow at the Contemporary Art Department this summer. John Temple's handsome face broke into a smile, revealing his perfect teeth. He pushed his Eames chair away from his desk to fully face her. Brava, Raquel, brava, though I had no doubt. She felt flush coming up her neck and tried to contain her grin in a way that would seem less obviously delighted by his approval. Your recommendation put it over the top. Nonsense, it was a solid application across the board. It seems small, but the RISD Museum is a jewel box. Their work has a lot of implications in the art world. Oh, I'm very aware. 3 of the fellows are from Harvard and 1 from Yale. Professor Temple looked impressed. He had, she then remembered, gone to Yale. Competitive field, even better. He smiled again, leaning in towards Raquel. A long way from selling sandwiches at the Met, huh? He said, pleased. She felt herself, her equalness evaporate. Quick and sudden, a red flush of shame replaced it, the kind that morphed fast into anger. Raquel simpered, fought hard to suppress the, what the fuck does that mean that he would have gotten had he come out with her with this bullshit back home? She reminded herself that he couldn't have meant it as an insult, even if it felt that way. This was not Brooklyn, this was Brown. Here was a place of measured tones and intellectual rivalries. Here was not a place where necks were rolled, nor teeth sucked, nor fucks flung around willy-nilly. Here was not, he just reminded her, a place for girls who worked concessions at the Met, which wasn't even factually correct. He hadn't even remembered her story right. Anyway, so I think I sort of wanted to look at the ways in which, I think when I wrote my first book and I went on tour for my first book, a lot of women of color would come up to me and talk about how they're like, oh my God, the way that you talk about how she's had to sort of put on a kind of costume of sorts to integrate into the world is so hard to read because it feels so reflective. And I had already known this was going to be my next book, and I was just really excited to examine how that happens. Like how you learn to tone some things down and then turn other things up. And so it was, I don't want to say fun. The first draft of this book was actually kind of dark, but it was sort of, it was interesting to kind of look at the ways in which you do sort of learn another language from the way in which you're allowed to express like anger, or you're allowed to express frustration, or you deal with like misunderstandings, and so then I sort of had this other task at hand, which was, well, how do I look at this in the context of this other character? So Anita de Monte was an immigrant to the country. She was sent on Operation Peter Pan, much like Ana Mendieta, who inspired her. And she becomes this artist, and she comes to New York, and she, has her first show, and at the very first night she's there, she ends up meeting and falling in love with this much bigger artist named Jack Martin. He's older, he's more established, and somehow or another, over the course of the first year or two of their relationship, she goes from being introduced as this brilliant young artist to my girlfriend, Anita, and she hates this. And so now that she's dead, she's deciding she's going to tell us all about herself, and she's telling us about this night that she sort of goes with Jack to the opening of his 3rd career retrospective, and how he sort of has her taking her around, and he keeps introducing her and wanting her to talk about her journey from Cuba, because it sort of is this like intriguing story to him that he's wants to in a funny way bask in her in the glow of her exoticness to some sense. So so I'm going to just read to you a little story about a little portion of the story wherein she gets a little bit, she's over it. So my heart hurt because I had cried to Jack many nights, worried for my father in Cuba. My sister and I had written letter after letter to the Cuban and American governments, begging to get him out of jail. My mother nearly suicidal for years over guilt that she'd left the island with him sitting in a prison. Our family destroyed, all because of his belief in Jesus Christ, all because he'd pissed off the wrong person. But now, for Jack, having a whole museum full of people talking about him and his work, that wasn't enough. He needed to turn my pain into cocktail conversation. Jack likes to say that I'm dramatic, but unfortunately, I told the guests, in this case, my sweet has just watched too many movies. My father was anti-Batista, the way a lot of middle-class Cubans were. He wasn't in the mountains with rifles or anything like that. He was just pushing papers and telling a few people some useful information, hardly a rebel. And it's true he ended up in jail, but for staying a practicing Catholic, just like Jack's family. In truth, we were a boring family stuck in the middle of an extraordinary moment. I could feel Jack's glare on me, his frustration. We'd performed this vaudeville routine countless times before. Jack setting up the story, then me coming over and coloring in the details about Castro coming for dinner, about hiding rifles in the house, about the rebels finding my sister's secret little chapel, my parents taking my sister and me to the airport for Pedro Pan before my father's arrest. Oh, I had learned to put on a good show. I just didn't feel like doing it that night. But you did come on Peter Pan, right? Rebecca asked after a moment of awkward silence. How wonderful that your parents were able to get you out when they did. Yes, truly wonderful. The U.S. convinced the parents of Cuba that the rebels were going to steal their children just so they could take us all and throw us into orphanages and delinquent homes. But hey, at least we're Americans now, right? I said, and I felt that I could almost weep. If you'll excuse me, I need to use the ladies' room. In the powder room, I splashed water on my face, looked in the mirror, and felt a sense of profound disappointment in myself. I already realized months ago that Jack was a selfish man. I already knew how important it is for an artist to protect their time, that critical thing required to think and ponder and question and perfect, but I hadn't learned to assert myself, to assert the value of my own hours, to protect them aggressively, even from the man I loved, because it was not Jack's fault or Rebecca's fault or anyone else's fault that I had not made anything worthwhile in months. What made the disappointment more sour, of course, was that I knew all of this, and still here I was in Berkeley instead of my residency in Florida. If the people I met here tonight, if Jack himself treated me like someone inconsequential, it was only because I didn't have anything to prove otherwise. The door to the restroom opened and it was Tilly carrying a drink. Hi there, she said. I thought you might need this. Thank you. I set it on the counter while I reapplied my lipstick. Tilly is Jack's art dealer, by the way. You look very fetching, Anita. She sounded sincere, and I was about to thank her when she added, that dress was made for you. Is that a Dior? Halston, I said flatly. My antenna went up. Tilly knows a Halston from a fucking Dior. Jack has a woman at Bergdorf who helps him pick things, I said. He's mentioned it. Tilly was what I learned wealthy white people called a handsome woman. Tall and lanky, but dressed in a way that was elegant. She was brilliant, absolutely the greatest champion her artist could have behind them, but ruthless. Was never a fan of mine. Well, at least not my work. She told me in her own polite way to my face, but as far as I'm concerned, to dislike my work is to dislike me. Unlike my husband, I don't separate the two. This is a big night for Jack, Tilly said, and he wanted you here by his side, wanted to make sure you looked as gorgeous as possible, for you to be the one that he introduced people to. Tilly, I picked up my purse and took a sip of my drink. Jack has a lot of big nights. I know, because they take up a lot of mine. I'm trying to be a friend here, Anita. And what's your friendly advice? Just shut up and let me make my family history a prop in his one-man show? My advice is this. Choose. Lots of women come to New York to become things, actresses, artists, singers, and they don't all have the talent to make it, but they also don't all have your luck either. Excuse me, I said. I heard that you saw my facialist at Helena Rubinstein, Tilly replied, and it was true, I had. She was excellent. The personal shopper, those gorgeous earrings, getting to travel around the world with someone who finds you gorgeous and fascinating and doesn't mind at all that you're a bit abrasive, finds it challenging even. And what the fuck are you trying to say, Tilly? I said. Lots of girls try to make it doing something really hard, Anita, and they fail, and there's no shame in that, but most of them don't meet and seduce the most successful artist of a generation. Seduce, I said with a laugh, but I felt the vibrato in my voice, not the quavering of tears, but of anger. I didn't move to New York to be a kept woman. I came to do my work. I was much shorter than Tilly, and she looked down on me now with a patronizing gaze. I wanted to slap her. Anita, she said, exasperated, the only reason you can't sit back and enjoy it, the only reason why you bristle at how you're introduced, at how Jack talks about your family or your history, is because you're so intently caught up on being taken seriously as an artist. And I'm just telling you that you don't have to be. Jack doesn't care. Her words said with the clipped boarding school enunciation, clawed and scratched at me like a feral cat, cloaked in the coo of gallery talk, the politeness of a museum powder room, but vicious, made worse because I knew I wasn't conjecture. I knew he had told her as much. He told her about the shopper and the facialist and that he didn't give a fuck if I was an artist or a housewife. But I care that I'm an artist, I said. A smile appeared on her face, one I remembered from when she looked at my portfolio. It was a smile doused in pity. I bit my tongue, resisted the urge because the truth of the matter is she was just the messenger, an intervention based on what I could tell were many, many heartfelt conversations. I wanted to say, you fucking puta, wait till you see what I do with my career now. I will not stop until you can't walk into a museum anywhere in this world without seeing an Anita de Monte. I won't stop till they refer to Jack as Anita de Monte's boyfriend. Wait till I fucking show you. But instead I just said, well, thank you for that advice. And I walked out of the bathroom, slammed the rest of my drink, and got another. I read this for some students. Thank you. I read this for some students yesterday at at Northwestern, and afterwards, one of the young women who hadn't gotten to read either of my books said, but do you ever worry that you're painting these Latino women as victims? And I was like, you haven't gotten to the end yet. I was like, that's why it's called She Laughs Last. But just to that point, I think the fun of writing Anita was, and part of why I stuck to this little tiny detail in Ana Mendieta's biography of coming on Pedro Pan, was she really never had this idea of being grateful. She was kind of like, you should be grateful I'm here. It's like there's a miracle that I ended up in your country, and thank God for it. You're so much better off now that I'm here. And so she sort of didn't take much, and that was a lot of fun in a character, and it was a lot of fun to sort of, there's a Spanish saying, a chingona, and it was fun to see her chingonaness infect Raquel in some way down the line. But I'm just going to read the end of that to sort of give you a taste of it. So after the reception, there's a dinner, and in the car, Jack wants to make sure that Tilly spoke to her, and she says, well, of course she did speak to me. And then at the dinner, someone decides to give a toast. Rebecca from the museum gave a toast. They began serving the entrees. I ordered the tartare, Giancarlo the mussels. Everyone was settling into their seats when I decided that I wasn't going to fall in line. Not that night, and frankly, not ever. I clinked my glass a few times, quieted the room. Excuse me, I said in my best Ricky Ricardo. I would like to make a toast to the man of the night, Senor Jack Martin. Everyone around the table now had eyes on me, genuine expressions of curiosity on their faces. Jack, though, wasn't looking at me. His eyes bore into his tartare instead. You know what? I said to the crowd, I know things you all can hear me so good. I am muy pequeñosita. Let me make this nice and easy. I stood up on the chair, let my stomach drop getting off the ground, but when I looked at Tilly's face of absolute horror from 5 place settings down, I decided it was worth it, just for a minute or two. If you don't know me, I'm Anita Tropicana, and I'm Jack's novia cubana. You all know Jack is a brilliant artist, but not many people know Jack is an humanitarian muy grande. America saved me from Castro, y Jack saved me from the life of a starving artist. Get down from there, you fucking bitch. He gritted his teeth from across the table. It was much more than a whisper, but not his full voice. I was too frightened to look down at him. I looked straight ahead and put on a big smile on my face and kept going. Jack said, you don't need to make art, Anita. I make art good enough for both of us. You just sit and look pretty. I could sense him moving. Even though I couldn't look down, I could hear his footsteps, heavy and quick, close and then far and then close again. As he walked around the long table, I just kept going. I just say, thank you. I know one who works so hard anyway. It's so nice you all celebrating Yak tonight. I screamed despite myself at the shock of being yanked off the chair. He threw me over his shoulder as he cursed me, quietly in my ears, calling me a bitch and a cunt and a fucking nightmare. Adios, everybody, adios, I called out to the crowd as he marched us out the door. He walked us out to the car that the museum had sent, opened up the back door, threw me into the back seat, and told the driver to take me to the fucking house. But I was on my way to the airport before he even got home, and I never, ever put Jack in front of myself again. And just because I mentioned this to Chris, I do want to say in this setting, I read for research dissertations. So I want you to know that all of the work that you all do is literally what I end up using for my research, for my books, for my articles. And so I want to thank you, especially anyone who's doing research on underrepresented communities, because I count and rely on it. And I just wanted to say thanks. So.
Thank you, Xochitl. That was marvelous. I loved. Actually, I listened to your book.
Oh, she's so great.
She was amazing.
She's
yes.
amazing.
Yeah.
Well, by the way, thank you, because I had forgot my reading glasses, so that was challenging. But she's so much better than me when she reads her.
No,
oh my gosh.
No.
Just wonderful.
Yeah.
And I don't usually do audiobooks, but I thought she was just.
She was really good.
Outstanding. Yeah.
She was good. So I'm just going to start with a few questions, and then I'm sure people in the audience will want to ask you things. But one, I know, because we talked about it, that you grapple with whether to put Brown in the book or call it like a New England university next to an art school.
Yeah, I know.
Right? So are you glad you did what you did? Or?
I am glad I did what I did. I think I remembered I did a piece in the Atlantic about noise, and I didn't want to name the school because I felt like where I went, and it was sort of, it starts out with like the noise of the city in the summer and then coming to kind of quiet. And I got into like a debate. We don't fight at the Atlantic, we debate. But I got into a debate with one of my editors who really desperately wanted me to name the college, and it was through a third party. And I said, did he go to Princeton or Yale? And then he had gone to Princeton. And so, and I was like, I said, I don't want to name the college because I want it to feel universal to whatever school you may have gone to. And so I think initially, I knew what this was going to kind of implicate of the time, and I was worried that in naming the school, it would sort of take something that I know is just a universal challenge of that era and just make it seem like it was unique to here. And I was really happy that I arrived at naming it, because then it started to feel a little ridiculous. It's like the school on the hill that's next to the art college, like felt a little like, okay, who are you kidding, right?
Yeah.
And I think more than anything, I mean, I invent some really crazy stuff about the afterlife in this book, and yet I could not invent a different college. Like, isn't that funny? It's just so, like, burned in my...
But, you know, I don't think reading it that it wasn't there wasn't a heavy Brown overlay.
Yeah.
It was about this young woman and her experience. It could have happened anywhere.
Totally. But I do think what I did felt Brown, and I feel proud of it, was that she's very into her studies.
Yeah, she is.
Like, she's really takes it seriously. And when she confronts her thesis advisor at the end, he's really open. Like, you know, he's a little resistant at first, and when he hears her, he's really open to reconsidering things.
Yeah.
And I thought those two things felt to me very true to this school. Yeah.
You mentioned a little bit about the research you do for your books, and I think those of us who can't write like you do think that it just comes out of your head and you don't have to do anything. Could you say a little bit about the process of writing this book? 2 characters, 2 times, 2 locations, their paths come together. What kind of research did you need to do, and what was it like to research Brown where you went? Or maybe you didn't need to do that.
Oh, no, I did. I had to I don't know what had happened to my copy. I had to get the architecture book, because in trying to describe some of the buildings, like I was like, you know, there's a lot of periods. So that was really, really good. And then I had to, like, weirdly, the hardest part now about writing period is remembering what existed and what didn't exist in terms of technology, right? Like, and then I tried to get my hands on my thesis, but the art history department's one of the only departments that didn't file theses into the library, which is kind of a bummer. But like, I mainly for that period, it was a lot of like, women's magazines and things, like, which I have a text thread of Brown friends, like, for, you know, female friends from Brown, and I was like, ladies, we're lucky we survived. Like, it was like Cosmo had a quiz that was practically like, choose your eating disorder. Yeah. Which went for you? Like, it was like so like bad, you know, and I think it was wild to kind of get it all without a chaser, you know, like sit there and go through like a stack of like Vogues and Cosmos and Marie Claire's, like, all together. But I wanted to just recreate the zeitgeist that was around them.
And you had she worked in WBRU, the radio station,
yes.
And so you had to get the playlist.
I had to get the playlist, and I mean, I ordered so many old copies of hip-hop magazines and Rolling Stones, and like, and it was, that part was kind of fun. The other thing was actually more intense, because that was researching a lot of the time period of the art world. It was also like a lot about Cuba and Peter Pan, and like, you know, sort of what happened to the Pedro Pans, like, and then eventually I went to Cuba because I wanted to follow, I guess when Ana Mendieta had gone back, and I thought that made sense in the story. She went back on a sort of artist exchange. They sent artists from Cuba to the United States, and they sent Cuban-American artists back to, you know, the homeland to sort of meet each other and travel the island. And so I sort of retraced her journey. And it was important because I had been in Iowa, which is where Ana Mendieta had been sent, and that was sort of what I think had her in the forefront of my mind, because I kept thinking about this 12-year-old girl from Cuba coming to Iowa. like without speaking the language. It's like winter. It was so, and so then I was like, what was it then really to feel like to go back home, you know? And that felt really important. So I did do quite a bit of research, yeah. And it was the most rewarding part was that when I stopped in Miami, I ended up meeting a lot of Bedrobans, and it was really beautiful to kind of talk to them about what they felt about the book and like their own experiences, and it was really, really cool.
That's great.
Yeah.
So could you say a little bit about how, and then we're almost to questions from everybody else, but you worked for a long time without being a writer.
Oh, yeah.
And then you went to the Iowa Writers Workshop, you've published now 2 novels, you've done all this other great work. Did you know all along this was where you were going, or did it hit you one day? What happened?
No. Oh, I'm so glad you asked this question, though. We have, my freshman roommate now said that if every time I tell this story, I have to give her $20. She's like, I'm so tired of you telling this story. But I came to Brown, I thought I was going to major in creative writing. I did think this. And then I got there, and my freshman year roommate had won the 17 Magazine Fiction Writers Contest and had been a finalist a different year. And she'd gone to Breadloaf. And I literally was like, well, then I give up. You know? I just was like, I just remember her just casually telling me this and me being like, well, I don't know what to do now. Yeah. You know, like I think at that age, or at least coming from where I was coming from, you were just like, well, we can't both be good at this. Yeah. You know, like, you're like, how could that be? You know, like, and so I was like, well, let me find something else. And then, like, I was just kind of an artistic person, so I ended up in the visual arts. And then I meandered, and, like, I mean, there were things that I chose to do. There were things that I sort of found interesting. I got into, like, a kind of cul-de-sac of small business problems. And, like, all of it, though, was really useful. I don't regret any of it, but I don't think it wasn't until, like, it was almost like this was like the whisper in the back of my head that I was like, I'd really like to do this. And then I sort of turned 40, and I just was like, well, I think if you're going to do it, you should do it now. And I think by that time, like, I'd paid off my loans, you know, like, I told the head of the Iowa Writers Workshop, I was like, I sort of had to almost have the lifetime of a child that I didn't have, like, to be able to take that opportunity, you know, and, like, almost give myself the confidence that probably, like, another generation of kid would have needed. But it took all that time, I think, to be able to sort of go. And then, like, I think, you know, part of any artistic venture is, like, trusting your own gut and, you know, sit through a critique and be like, okay, cool, I'm going to change these 2 things and I'm not changing anything else, you know, because, like, this is the way that a book needs to be, and be able to listen to that. And so I think, I don't regret any of it, but I think it was definitely, a lot of that time was kind of meandering, because, you know, there wasn't really, it's so great now. I think we spoke about this when I came to commencement last year, and it was like, I hadn't been in a couple of years, and it was like, just to see when the sock inverts, how different everything looks, and you can see when it starts. And so we just didn't have a lot of modeling, you know, of, like, what to do, especially, like, if you were into the art, like, that just didn't exist. And so it's, like, kind of beautiful now to get to, like, kind of go out and meet younger undergraduates. And, like, even when I was at Iowa, there was, like, a young first-gen low-income student who just graduated from Harvard and came straight to the workshop. And I was like, just the idea that he was like, I'm going to be a creative writer, I was like, that's amazing. You know, like, I just thought that was like, this is time moving on, and all these thoughtful changes that have happened, and, like, real change. So, yeah, it was a journey, but I'm really excited about it.
It's great you did it.
Yeah.
So one more question, which is, I don't know how common it is for people to write fiction books and then have this big nonfiction portfolio. And is that sort of, are they different, or how do you put those things together?
I don't think it's that common, is what I've
not
started
that common,
to
right?
figure out.
I was trying to figure that out.
It's, like, really not that common, is what I'm starting to figure out. It really helps me, because I think I've always been interested in, well, I think I knew that I wanted to write Latina lives, right? Like, and I think you can't do that without touching on social issues, just in the course of existing, the personal, being political. But I really don't like when things feel like polemics. You know what I mean? Like, and so the nonfiction sort of helps me because I work through a lot of my thoughts about bigger issues, and then I find that then when they come out in the fiction, they're sort of more diffused, and it's like they're atmospheric at that point. Like it's like, because it can be very subtle, because it's sort of like in my, almost like in my chemistry, I guess. And then on the other side, it really also then helps me really think about how I feel about these much deeper issues. Like I think when the SCOTUS decision on affirmative action came out, I think I wrote that. I wrote that on my piece on my notes app, like because I so already sort of.
You had it in your.
I had it, and I had that. It's so thought out because I'd been working on this book, you know, for so long. In fact, and when I did the piece about noise and gentrification, I had already written kind of Raquel's like culture shock coming here. So it was like so they sort of for me are very conversant. Yeah,
That's really interesting. Okay, I have more questions I could ask, but I want to give people in the audience a chance to get in.
Oh,
Sergio.
hi, Sergio. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
But in many ways, for a Latino young person or a person of color, a young person of color, finding their footing in that space and finding their own confidence, their own courage, their own voice. It's a great message. And I was just wondering if you talked a little bit about it, but if you would add any other thoughts about that experience in your own life and in others that you've seen.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to me. When I got here, like that was like 1995, I think Julia Alvarez had just published In the Time of Butterflies, like, and When I Was Puerto Rican had just come out in paperback because I remember it being out on display in the bookstore. And like, there was this thought, Ana Castillo had her first kind of big book, and there was this thought that this is like going to be this moment, and then it wasn't. And so we sort of had these like 3 books, okay? And then, you know, one book doesn't perform well, nobody buys Latino authors, you know? And so it felt really important to me to write Olga in a way that was commercially appealing, but that with the most beautiful language possible embodied the Latino experience that only Latinos would know, without explaining it to anybody and not telling you what this food is, or, you know, if a character thinks in Spanish, not italicizing anything, which like forever you couldn't do. You know, Ana Castillo only got away with it because she wrote about New Mexico, and legally Spanish was still like a legal language of New Mexico, and so that's the only way she was able to get away with it in 1991, and then nobody else could get away with it for like 2 decades. And so I think that it felt really important to me to offer up, particularly, you know, I just knew, you know, let's say we were so small, but there were like 200 or 300 Latino students here when I was here, and a lot of them were women. And then I would meet people all the time that had had this experience, and I wasn't seeing that in literature, okay? Like, I was not seeing the educated, like, yes, there's disadvantages, but we also have a lot of advantages, and I wasn't seeing that experience of where the real challenge is not so much assimilating to this country. The challenge is assimilating to a culture that is often at odds with what your family's values are. Like, you know, to succeed at work, you have to always be at work. And then what does that mean to, like, you know, how are you a present person in your family? And so I think that really, with the first book, I was trying to just make it exist. And with the second book, I was sort of, to your point, trying to give the Raquels of the world a big sister that maybe they didn't know that they had, you know. And I think the reason why Ana Mendieta is so important to so many Latinas is because it's like our lineage of somebody doing something that was worthwhile. She had won the Rome Prize. She'd won a Guggenheim. You know, she had like this burgeoning career, and then it was silenced and erased. and it's like in that erasure drops your confidence. And so like this was sort of an artistic way to kind of give us that history back. Yeah. Thank you.
Can I ask you just one brief follow-up on that? Because in the book, toward the end, her history is to some extent recovered.
Yes.
Did that really happen?
Her history's kind of slowly been recovered, but honestly by Latinas, really, and it's like, and so I think Raquel ends up kind of acting like a symbolic, her estate will like to take a lot of credit for everything, but if it wasn't, again, like to talk about JSTOR, if it wasn't for this steady drum of people getting their PhDs in art history or their master's degrees in art and studying her, or in women's studies and pulling her up and studying what happened to her story, like she would not, that through line wouldn't have set the place setting for, set the table for what happened to her career now. Yeah.
Other questions?
Hi.
Diana.
Hi.
I liked reading about Raquel when her mom and sister came to visit.
I'm so glad you brought this up.
Yeah. So can you share, when you were a student, your family's world? Did they come see you? Or is there any similar, did you pull from any of your experiences?
So, well, first of all, thank you so much. I was almost going to read that part. It was really important to me to make her family come and visit, Raquel's family come visit. Well, and it was kind of fun going down memory lane of what happened when we used to have the long distance and the landlines. And it's like, like it really, you'd have to go home and there'd be a prearranged time for a phone call, and it would happen like once a week. And if you called at any other time, they would think that something terrible had happened. And so she has this weekly call with her mom, and then the mom's gonna come visit. And she's, her mom was a single mom. And it was that weekly call was very much like I had this with my grandparents. It was always Sunday morning. I think I didn't know until I was working on the book, this actually really critically weird missing part of the first gen experience that as much as I've been in rooms where we talk about this, I hadn't ever thought about it until literally I was writing it, which is suddenly you're experiencing something that you can't describe to your family. And especially if they hadn't gone to college at all, and they don't understand anything. And you're feeling all of these stressors that are so new to you, but then also impossible to explain. And it's like, it was the first time that it made me realize how much I had been cut off from my support system, that I hadn't even realized. My grandmother was she was really good. Like, I was raised by my grandparents. My grandmother was like a great gossip. Like, so she would know everybody's business in my high school. She's like, oh, well, you shouldn't trust so-and-so. Like, she was really, really good at this stuff. Like, I'm very street smart. And then suddenly it was like, I couldn't even explain to her who half of these people were and what half of our issues were, and like she's not gonna understand that I got into a fight with somebody about classism. It's like this isn't gonna play well at all. And so that was just kind of lost. And I think, in my first book, there's a grandmother character that's actually really much more based on my grandfather. And in this book, there's a mother character that's very much based on my grandmother, who ended up not visiting anymore because it made her feel too uncomfortable. And, and that was always like really sad. I get like sad now. Like, my graduation was like such a miserable weekend for them. And every time I think about it, and I remember like my best friend and I became best friends after Brown. And like, that was what we bonded over, was how stressful commencement was. Like, and I think that's why I got so excited when I was waiting for Carlos's speech, and like I was just like, what? Yeah, and I was just watching all these families, just super like they've been here 9,000 times, and it was like just fantastic. And but that was really, really rough. And I think I wanted to put her family in to also just show also like the distance from which she's. Like the journey that this was more than the ride, right? Like up the 95. Yeah.
But her mother, maybe the grandmother's figure, was very perceptive about the boyfriend.
So perceptive about the boyfriend. So perceptive about the boyfriend. And, and also not imperceptive about Raquel. Like, I think that there was like, a little bit of this sense of the further you go down this path, the less that you belong to me. And And I think that feels painful. And I think there's also this really weird revelation that doesn't happen quite as much, but it still does happen, which is like, you're so independent once you're eating off your meal plan or you're doing your work study, and then suddenly like you're fiscally independent, you're not asking for advice, you're figuring out all your own classes, and it's like you really, that idea of suddenly you see somebody and they're an adult and you're my parent, but I don't actually need you right now, and it's strange. And so like I think that was really important for me to include, and and it's been sort of nice hearing people talk about that section.
Other questions? Yes, please, right here. We have a microphone.
Hi, thank you so much for the reading.
Thank you.
I was interested in, while writing, the process of deciding to include Jack's perspective and what that internal experience was like for the book.
Yeah, that's more research. I spent a lot of time reading dissertations about domestic violence and studies of domestic violence offenders and sort of like common like triggers and common pathologies and so that was sort of like unpleasant. Like that was unpleasant to spend time in. But I felt it was really important. I think that a lot of my writing is kind of about power and how power gets deployed and actually operates. And I think it's really hard to do that in a way that feels accurate without getting to sort of see the other side of it. And I think I wanted, part of the fiction of the whole thing was like, I wanted to give Anita some agency. So I also, you get to see the ways in which Jack's terrible, but you also get to see the ways in which she makes his life a nightmare and in the afterlife. And that felt rewarding in a different way. Like those parts were fun. Like, when she first kind of comes to him as a bat, like that's amazing. That was so fun to write. Like I just delighted in listening to Graceland, like while I was writing that. But like, I think that it felt important to also show the worldview that he had and the worldview that's enabled by the people around him. And I think so often when we have sort of badly behaving people with power, especially now, it's like it's very easy to pariah one person, but it's harder to like sort of examine a whole coterie of people that's just replicated in a system, and so I think I wanted to show that, and to show that like someone gets erased through teeny gestures that could be literally at the whim of one person's ego or one person's desire to preserve a legacy, and that felt important and worth the the thought of like, oh, you're verbalizing the predator or whatever, but I felt it just felt important to do.
Thank you. Yes,
thank
please,
you. Yeah.
Right here.
Also, thank you very much. I'm so new to this, and a friend recommended you, but I'm in the middle of Olga Dies Dreaming.
Oh.
And I was reading her mother's letter early on.
Yeah.
Like, why are you going to this college, this fancy man's college, and they're going to
yeah.
disappear you? And a lot of us are talking about the hidden curriculum and all of the things that are the unstated rules and all of the things that people who are new to college experience and class and race and all of that. And I'm wondering, and I know there's a lot of young people here, I'd love to pass the mic and ask them, but I'm wondering if you've spoken to younger students, to current students about all of that, about identity here at Brown and elsewhere.
I did have a chance. Now time goes so fast. I did have a chance maybe 2 years ago to go to the BC. I never get, thank you. I'm like, it's still a third world syndrome. Yeah. I know, the TWC. I got to go to the TWC and talk with students, and it was funny because we went around the room. It was a great group. We went around, it was great, and then it's so great getting to meet students, because then when you go to commencement and you see them graduate, you just have the best time. Like, it's just so much more fun. But we had a really great conversation. We walked around the room and we talked about what everybody was studying, okay? And that was always, to me, the most interesting place to start, because you can study kind of anything here, right? And so people were doing such a variety of things, and they might be doing chemistry and then minoring in like Caribbean Afro-Am studies or like, ethnic studies, or they were doing like, like pre-med, but then like, and so many things they were able to work into their curriculum that actually reflected who they were. And so then they got to me and we were talking about what I studied and we were talking about my thesis. And I was telling them how I wrote about colonialism in post-impressionistic art and Picasso and Gauguin. And one of the young women was like, well, why did you study that? Like, why did you write about that? And I was like, because I had no other, like, that was the only way that I could find into anything remotely, like, remotely based on that. And then I thought that it was great to sort of frame the conversation that way, and they were shocked. Do you know what I mean? Like, that was like shocking to them. And so I think that then we sort of talked a lot about what was working, if that makes sense. And then I've had chances to talk, like when I come up for corporation meetings with graduate students and undergraduate students, and I think that there are ways in which, I actually think like maybe, I feel like what I've heard more is like, and it's true to the times, like I think that there's more challenges around gender affirmation and the ways in which multi-generational people deal with this than in some ways about the ideas of like being able to fully be who you are. But I do think the academic piece is a big deal because it validates, there's a way to validate with why you're here, who you are. And so there's always times when people can do better, but I think mainly it was like once we reframed it that way, suddenly it was like, well, we also have this great thing. Like the Center for Low-Income First-Gen Students, that is like a game changer. I think, everybody wants more space. We all wish we had more space. But I think the idea that these things have been thought about has changed the tenor of the conversation is what I would probably say. And again, like things can always be better. But like I went to, to put it in a different context, I started, me and Carlos and like, I don't know, Lenyax and a couple of other people, there were maybe 6 of us, we started the Brown University Latino Alumni Council. And we went last year to the 20th annual breakfast that we have for commencement. And the tent was like packed. And it was packed with parents, and it was packed with parents that, a couple people came up to me that I'd met at that BCS thing, TWC thing, and they're like, my mom's a librarian, and then the other person, like, their family had just come a few years ago to America. And so, like, it was like a broad range of Latino experiences, but there was a space for them as part of commencement. And so I think, there's literally always a little bit more, but I think that mainly what I've felt is like, I think it's the wider world where we're having bigger challenges, and I think we talked a lot about that too, yeah.
I think we have time for one more question before we move on to book signing, and if there isn't one more, please. Yes, right over here.
Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. I've been teaching Latinx literature probably since you were in undergrad, and it's
Amazing.
an exciting feeling. It just is richer and richer. And I'm curious about 2 things.
Yeah.
One, about your experience at Iowa. I know Carmen Maria Machado, among others, went there.
Yeah.
And then the other is I'm curious about how you like to be identified as a writer. Do you take on the Latina label? Does it vary in contexts? How do you think of yourself as a writer?
Oh, yeah. Iowa was fine.
It was COVID, right?
Yeah, like it was fine even if it wasn't COVID. It's like a residency. I was 42. Most of my classmates were 25, 26. I got there and was like, we have no time. And they were like, we have all the time in the world. So like, it was just really different, and I was in Iowa after a whole life in Brooklyn. I got an apartment in March. I stayed for one day to find this apartment, not even a day, half a day, because I had to get back to my job. And I came back, and I was like, well, I live downtown, and I come to move in, and now I'm looking for the rest of the city, and then I realized that that's it. Okay, like this is this is downtown, and then it's like houses and then fields. So, it was fun to work there because it was more fun to work than to go out. So that was Iowa. And, and it's like a peer mentor program, and that's your community. But I got really lucky. My first semester, my workshop was the novel workshop, and I was the first person to go because, like I said, we don't have any time. They were like, who wants to go first? It was like, me. I was like, we don't have time. And so I had this novel workshop with Sam Chang, which is amazing. And I had a sci-fi and fantasy class with Kevin Brockmeyer. And I wouldn't have been able to write this book had I not taken that class. I wouldn't have been able to end my first book had I not taken that class. And Margot Livesley changed the way that I revise. So, I encountered amazing faculty, but it was it was a time. Yeah, it was a time, a very quick time. And then identifying as a Latina author, I think I'll just paraphrase Toni Morrison, which is, I guess, when it's said as a pejorative, if it's said pejoratively, I have an issue with it. But generally speaking, that is exactly who I am, and I'm really proud of it. And not only that, it's wild. We did a Latina to Latina event. It's like a live podcast taping. It was 125 Latinas came out in the rain on a rainy Wednesday, to talk about this book. And I feel like I'm in an intimate conversation with Latina women in particular, women of color a little bit more generally. And that feels like a really beautiful place to be. And I'm talking to them, and it's not that I'm writing to what they say as much as I already had started this book, and people would come, and they'd bring their Olgas, and they'd want to talk about 2 paragraphs about her in college. And I was like, I'm on the right path, with this new book. I was and so I think, I feel like we're in this sort of spiritual conversation, and I'm really proud of that. So, and I tell people all the time, usually a book to hit the bestseller list, you have to have a book club, or, you have to have all these things. You have to not have a person having a meltdown on a national morning show to get picked by a morning show. And I didn't have any of those things for the first book, but I had just a zillion Latinas reading it and being like, I've never read me in a book before, and then passing it on. And so it was all word of mouth from the community. So I'm very proud of that, actually. Yeah.
Thank you. So I wanted to do 2 things before I thank you.
No.
I want to recognize Karen Wolf, who's the director of the John Carter Brown Library, who's
oh my
letting
gosh,
us use this space.
This is amazing.
So thank you, Karen. And we have a book signing, right?
Yes.
Yeah, we have a book signing. I want to welcome everybody to stay for that. But Xochitl,
And thank you. No, I'm so
Thank you so
honored
much.
to be in this space too. It's beautiful. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.